So in today's lesson, we're going to be learning the last note in our first unit on diversity of living things. And so the topic is a subsection of the animal kingdom, where we're going to be talking about mammals and characteristics of mammals. And so I'm hoping as we go through this that you are trying to compare the characteristics of mammals with the other vertebrates and what makes mammals a specific type of vertebrate. Before we begin, I want you to just pause the video and think for a minute about what the characteristics of mammals that you can think of, that you can just sort of brainstorm off the top of your head. What is it that you already know about mammals? All right, so let's talk about this. So the first characteristic for me that I remember learning about mammals was the idea that they have young that are nourished by milk in some capacity, right? So from mammary glands. So of course, and then we're going to go through different types of mammals and the subsections of mammals in a little bit. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But that is typically the characteristic that is referred to when trying to describe the characteristics of mammals. But there are other characteristics as well. They are warm-blooded. They are what is referred to as endothermic, which means that they have internal systems that control their body temperature and adjust to changes in the environment. So the body temperature remains constant, but you have mechanisms internally that allow you to manage changes in the external environment. The next characteristic is that they have hair with various functions, right? So for instance, some have fur that act as insulation. I'm thinking about maybe a bear, for instance. Others have hair with protection, so I'm thinking about maybe, let's say, a porcupine. And others with sensory detection. For example, in our ear canal, we have special hairs that help us to detect sound. So I'm wondering if you added in four-chambered heart, fact that mammals have a four-chambered heart, based on maybe some of our previous conversations, that being one of the characteristics that was talked about with the other segments. And last but not least, mammals are characterized by the fact that they have a very well-developed brain relative to the other vertebrates. I'm going to see if I can pull up in a browser here just a picture of a mammalian brain. Maybe in comparison. Let's see what we find here, people. Ooh. Okay, so here we have a variety of different brain structures, all of which are from mammals, so that's pretty cool, and you can see their relative size. A lot of that has to do with just the size of the organism itself. I was hoping we would come across one that compares maybe the lizard brain, or the reptilian brain, I should say. Let me see. Ooh, versus reptile. Right, so, here we go. Here we have an alligator brain versus a goose versus a human and a rat. And so you can see the alligator is obviously the reptile, and it has a what appears to be a less sophisticated brain with fewer folds in it. All right, so let's get back. What I want to talk about next is the various groups of mammals, the various types of ways we can further classify mammals. So that's what I want to do next. We can divide them, as I said, into three groups, and a lot of it has to do with the way that the embryo itself develops. And so the first of which is what we refer to as the monotremes. So the monotremes are the sort of, I would say, very distinctive, but also fewest in number. And once I name a monotreme, you're going to know probably what it is, but let's go through the characteristics. So in each of the groups that we're going to talk about in terms of how mammals are classified, I want you to be thinking about how the embryo develops, because that is a major point of distinction. Okay, so the first characteristic is that they lay eggs. That is how the embryos develop. They lay eggs, and those eggs are incubated outside the body. Most of you are probably surprised that mammals, there are mammals that lay eggs. So that is one point about that. And the only living species that we're aware of are the platypus and the echidna. So I want to take a look at that as well. So I'm going to pull up a browser here. And we can look at pictures of, I want to look at the platypus first, just in case you aren't familiar with it. We can take a picture, we can take a look at a diagram so you know how to visualize it. So here's one photo of a platypus. Now sometimes it's referred to as a beaver duck because it is primarily aquatic. And it has, it doesn't really have feet that allow it to move fairly efficiently on land. You can see, though, it does have a body covered with fur and a tail-like structure, but it also has a bill. So sometimes it's also referred to as a duck-billed platypus. So there is the platypus. And now I want to look at an echidna. Before I do that, though, let me just go back to what we just had, because it's adorable. There's baby platypus, really cute. Okay, now I want to look at the echidna, and there are different species of echidna. I want to say 3, but I'm not 100%. So here's some images of the echidna. So to me, it kind of looks like a hedgehog. It has spiky little quill-like hairs. And so it's going to lay eggs because it is a monotreme. So now I want to talk to you about one of the defining characteristics of mammals and how that is interesting when it comes to monotremes. So monotremes, they don't have teats or nipples as other mammals might in order for their young to feed. When they produce milk, they actually just sort of, it's not really sweating per se, but the milk just sort of oozes out of their pores directly. And so, interesting point, so you can sort of think of it as they sweat milk, but it's not really sweat per se. But their milk is actually, because they live in the aquatic environment and they're sort of sweating out this milk, not really sweat, their milk has extra antimicrobial components to it, and that's just because the transfer from the young isn't as sort of, I would say, as clean as it could be. All right, so monotremes, super interesting group of mammals. Okay, so the second one I want to talk about are, I'm kind of just easing it out here, marsupials. So the marsupials, maybe when you were thinking about mammals, also came to mind. And so marsupials give birth to partially developed embryos. So maybe you didn't, when you think of marsupials, what organisms do you think of? Hopefully you think of kangaroos, possums, and koalas. Those are all marsupials. But maybe you didn't know that one of the reasons we can classify certain organisms as marsupials is not just because they have the pouch, but because the embryos develop in that pouch, but they are born first as partially developed little embryos. So I'm having trouble getting the videos to play the audio portion of the video right directly on this screen. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to highly, highly, highly recommend that you watch the video that I post on kangaroos and how they give birth, because it is fascinating and super kind of wild and crazy. So make sure that you watch that. Last but not least, we have to talk about the final type of mammal, which are the placentals. And so basically, again, remember, when we classify an organism as a mammal, the way that we make distinctions between the groups of types of mammals is based on how the young sort of grow. Their embryos grow. So in a placental, we are placentals. Embryos develop completely within the female uterine structure, and are born fully sort of grown, I guess, not grown, but fully able to survive on their own. And they will feed off of the placenta, and the placenta is basically, I guess it's like this tissue, like blood-rich tissue, nutrient-rich tissue that is closely connected to the mother's blood vessels, and that's how the young is fed. I can show you a picture of that. Okay, so I found a few pictures. Right here we can see a picture of a human baby in utero, where, I'm going to look at this one right here. You can see that there is, let me see if I can, there we go. You can see that there is a placenta. This placenta is actually not in a great spot because it's blocking the opening of the cervix, but you can see how there's the placenta there, and then the placenta is attached to a membrane, and then there's the umbilical cord, and that's how the baby gets fed in utero, and so that's true of mammals in general. And then here's like a real life picture. Not sure. There we go. Of a newborn baby, and of course you can see again that umbilical cord, and then there's that nutrient-rich placenta. Okay, so most mammals 95% of mammals are placentals, indeed, right? It's probably why when we think of mammals, we tend to think of placentals as opposed to marsupials and monotremes. And those include primates. We are primates. Apes are primates, as well as bears and, yes, bats. So there's our overview of mammals. I hope that was interesting for you. I do hope that you watch the video on kangaroos and how their embryos are born early, because it is super fascinating. And if I find any other videos, or if you find any videos on marsupials or monotremes that you think are cool and would like to share, feel free to share that on our Google Classroom posts.